Welcome to this presentation on creating digital texts. In this presentation, I will be providing a rationale for the creation of digital texts and also providing you with links to some examples of digital texts. One of the reasons for creating digital texts is because of dissatisfaction with content area textbooks as traditionally created. Content area textbooks are the primary source of information in classrooms. However, they frequently assume unrealistic levels of background knowledge, are written above the targeted reading level of the students. So for example, although a science text may say it's written at a grade 6 level, careful analysis actually shows that it's written at a grade 7 or grade 8 level. Frequently this seems to be done because a textbook publisher is trying to position their textbook as being more challenging or more rigorous than someone else's textbook. However, this can cause serious challenges for students who are struggling with reading skills. As evidence of the challenge of using these textbooks, frequently they introduce new vocabulary very quickly. So an analysis of a grade 10 science textbook revealed that it introduced a total of 3,000 new terms within a single text. Finally, often textbooks are written in a way that make it difficult for students to identify the main idea within a text. Sometimes textbooks are guilty of using something called seductive details, which means that perhaps in an effort to make the text more interesting, they include little side stories about an individual or additional details that they hope will be of interest to the student. While the goal of creating an interesting text is a valuable one, sometimes it is very difficult for students who are struggling with reading and with reading comprehension to be able to identify the main idea within a written text. Consider this text from a typical grade 9 science text. Although you may be able to decode it, I think that you would agree that there is an awful lot of vocabulary that's being introduced here, and that this text, in order for you to be able to comprehend what is written, draws upon a lot of background knowledge. The other thing that happens when a text is challenging for a student to decode is that it becomes much more difficult for a student to make active use of comprehension strategies and to monitor comprehension when it is difficult to simply decode the text on a word-by-word level and to be able to understand the text on a sentence-by-sentence level. So when it's challenging just to be able to simply decode and read the text, it's even more challenging for a student to be able to monitor their comprehension. So on this page you see an example of a commercially produced digital text. Some of the features you'll notice are that there are bolded hyperlinks, so if a student clicks on a word they can receive a definition for that word. There's good use of diagrams and labeling of diagrams. Sometimes these can even be interactive, so if a student clicks on them something happens, or they can be brief video clips. Typically there's careful thought given as to the use of headings or subheadings, and it's easy for a student to move around within a text and see the relationship of one piece of information to another piece of information. There's also the availability to search within a text for a specific term. You'll also see that there are some features such as the ability to make text larger or smaller, or to have an entire text read aloud. Of these features, such as having a well-organized table of content and clear chapter headings and illustrations, are things that can be done in any text. Some of these features, such as providing hyperlinks to definitions, being able to change text size, being able to search within a document, are features that are really only available or made far easier by having digital texts. One of the nice things about having digital text available as a tool is that it allows us to be able to create a text that meets an individual's needs. We're going to talk a little bit about a young girl named Krista. Krista, at the time of this presentation, was 10 years old. She had a visual impairment and also had a bilateral sensorineural hearing loss, so that means that in both ears she had a very severe hearing loss. Krista communicated using sign approximations and gestures. She also made use of an augmentative and alternative communication device. When we first started working with Krista, she had an interest in books, and she very quickly learned 20 sight words and also learned some independent decoding skills. So she knew many of her letter sound correspondences, so the letters that sound is made, and she was also able to demonstrate sound blending skills. One of the ways that we used digitized text with Krista was to create shared reading activities in which Krista would be responsible for reading some of the text and her partner would read the rest of the text. So in this example on this page, Krista would read the word Krista, her name, and then her partner would read the word summer. Krista would demonstrate her ability to read this word by making her sign for Krista. For this page, Krista would read the word I, her partner would read went, Krista would read on and indicate her ability to read by making the sign for on, her partner would read about with, and then Krista would read the word dad. So again, the use of digitized text allows the possibility of creating individualized stories that can then be used within a shared reading activity. The creation of these shared reading texts was used not only for personal narratives, but was also used as a way to help support Krista's participation in the general education curriculum. This is a sample of the text that was being read with the children in Krista's grade 3 classroom. So I'll just allow you a moment to read through and to think about some of the content that the children in grade 3 were reading about. So the challenge then becomes for the teacher how to provide Krista with access to the same content as her general education peers, while realizing that it's not just a question of decoding the text, but actually thinking about how best to make this content meaningful to Krista that will ultimately be the greatest challenge. So there are options like, for example, providing books on tape. However, simply reading this text aloud for Krista probably will not be the best way to support her comprehension. It's a fairly difficult text. Similarly, your use of the Kurzweil 3000, which can convert the written text into speech, again, may not provide all the support that is necessary. The creation of a customized ebook may be a very interesting way to support Krista in gaining access to this material. So there are a variety of features of digital texts that may be helpful. First, support can be provided for decoding through the use of the text-to-speech feature. So if you click on a word, you can hear it read aloud. The use of onboard dictionaries can support students who need to learn some of the vocabulary that is being used within a text. Again, by clicking on a word, you can find out more information about that word. Finally, in customized digital texts, the teacher can think about how the text can be rewritten in a way so that there is a closer match between what the student already knows and what they are reading about. Clearly, the text should introduce some new information to the student, but ideally it would not introduce so much new information that it's difficult for the student to comprehend the text. Some additional features of eTexts that we'll discuss in a later lesson include e-coaching and built-in note-taking. So first, with respect to support for decoding, most digital texts allow the use of both synthesized speech and digitized speech. Synthesized speech refers to text that is read aloud in a sense by the computer. So when you hear the weather being read on TV, that's an example of synthesized speech. When you get directions from your global positioning system device in your car, that's an example of synthesized speech. So it's text being read aloud by the computer. There is also the option of digitized speech, which is recording of an actual human voice. One very interesting feature of digitized text is it allows the creation of onboard dictionaries, which means that the person who is creating the digital text has the opportunity to define new terms as they're introduced. So the writer can create hyperlinks to definitions for the terms. The nice thing about this is that for someone who doesn't need the definition, they can just keep reading. For someone that does need the definition, they can read about what the term means and then return to the text. Ideally, definitions are written in simple, clear language. It's often helpful to use analogies to support an individual's understanding, so to make links to known information. These definitions can also include illustrations, audio files, or video clips to help support understanding. Ideally, a definition addresses at least two of the three following components. First, the definition would have information on a term's class, so some discussion of to what big group does this term belong. So for defining elephant, we would say an elephant is a very large animal. There would then be information on attribute discrimination. So what is the defining characteristic of this particular animal that makes it different from other animals? So we might want to say something like elephants have very long noses, called trunks. Finally, it's often helpful to provide information on the function of a term. So what is something that particular animal in this case is used for? So the goal is to provide enough information that the individual can differentiate this particular term from other terms, or is able to differentiate an elephant from other animals. Perhaps the most challenging aspect of writing a digital text is to adapt the text so that there is a better match between the text and the world knowledge of the reader. Ideally, a good adapted text introduces some new information, but not so much new information that the reader is overwhelmed. So the challenge for the author or for the teacher is to think about, within a text that is to be adapted, what is the critical information and what is the other information, or fluff in some ways, that can be deleted. This is not to imply, and perhaps the term fluff is unfortunate, that the other information is of little value. Rather, it is to say that if it's going to be challenging for an individual to read and to remember a text, we want to make good decisions about how much text and what type of information we're asking the individual to read and to remember. Other ways in which texts can be adapted to support understanding and retention is to make good use of headings and subheadings, and to think carefully about how to distribute new information across the entire chapter so that an individual is not overwhelmed with a lot of new information all at once. So here's an example of how the westward migration content was adapted for Krista in a digital text. So the name of her book was Prairie Days, and as you can see, we've provided a hyperlink definition for the word prairie. In this particular case, we chose not to provide a picture because there's a picture available below in a sense of a big field with a lot of grass. We also tried to write the definition in a way that it would make use of language that was already familiar to Krista. So that you can see in the text that we've written that we've really tried to cut down to the bare bones of the westward migration and what occurred. We've provided a map there to support her understanding, and something that the teacher might want to talk about while reading this text for the first time with Krista would be, what does it mean to go west, and to really mark that out on the map. In writing this text, we tried to create something that Krista would probably read with somebody else the first one or two times through, but would also be something where fairly quickly we would hope she would be able to read and work with this text independently. The words that Krista would be expected to read within this text are highlighted in yellow. Horses is a term that's familiar to Krista because she participates in a therapeutic riding program. Clearly, this is a very simplified text. While writing it, we really tried to think about, realistically, what is it we would expect someone to remember about the westward migration 3 to 6 months down the road? What is a way that we can create a text which addresses the content that the general education students are learning while not introducing too much information to Krista at once? The other thing we've tried to do with this text is put new information evenly distributed throughout the entire book. So again, some of the nice things that we can do through the creation of ebooks or digital texts is support decoding through the use of a text-to-speech feature. We can help to build a student's vocabulary through the use of onboard dictionaries, and we can help to create a better link between the content that we want the student to read about and their existing world knowledge by adapting the text. In your upcoming class, you'll be discussing some other examples of digital texts, and you'll also have an opportunity to make one of your own. Over these last few slides, I've provided some examples of some different digital texts. You may want to click on these and just start to get a sense of what are some of the capabilities that are possible through the creation of digital texts.